Hello, everyone. I wanted to make a quick little lecture on parts of the process involved in what's called conducting a job analysis. If you paid attention to the earlier video that I made explaining what a job analysis does and the process behind it to help develop a job description and therefore have that documentation, that paperwork available, then you know a little bit about the steps involved. But now I'd like to turn around and get more involved in the steps to conduct a job analysis, to write up that job description. I really want to focus, believe it or not, on the biggest step, which is the very first step, which is getting you started. So let me turn around and spend some time talking about this here. Okay. As I put up there, the goal of any job analysis, and we said this if you happen to watch the earlier slide, is to identify the tasks performed in a job. So one of the very first things you want to do is determine what are the duties, what are the competencies, what are the tasks that any particular job has. For example, if you are going to be a nurse, some of the tasks may be to turn around and obviously take care of your patients, maintain your paperwork and your documentation, give meds, assist in surgeries if that's part of your job. Those are the tasks, maybe some of the tasks involved. Secondly, remember we want to talk about the conditions under which the task is performed. Are you working outside? Are you working inside? Are you working long hours? Are you working short hours? Are you working in a cave? Are you working in an office or many other possible things? And then finally, we talk about what are called the KSAOs. What knowledge do you need to have the job, to be able to do the job? What skills do you need, specifically trained skills potentially? What overall abilities do you need? And then anything else that comes along. The O in KSAO is others. So those are some of the things that need to be done. We can go ahead and get into the very first one. And this is what we're really spending most of our time on, and that is identifying the tasks. Okay. When we talk about identifying the tasks, this is the very first step of conducting a job analysis. All right. We've got to figure out what the job is all about. And this is sort of a repeat of what I just said. What tools are necessary to complete the job? When and where is the job performed? So that's sort of a repeat of the previous slide, but very, very important that we turn around and do that. Okay. So number one, if we're going to conduct a job analysis to determine these things, how do we gather the information? Well, one of the first things I want to point out to you is not to reinvent the wheel. I think a lot of people do that when they don't really need to do that. They forget about going out and gathering existing information. Are there any prior job descriptions that are out there that you can look at? Is there any prior documentation? It may be outdated a bit, but it may give you some duties and qualifications that you wouldn't have otherwise. So very first thing I would say before starting into questionnaires and interviews and all the other things is to turn around and see what you can gather as far as information. And right along with that, you can gather information before doing extensive observations of that by asking. Simply asking people, okay? Interview those who are knowledgeable about the job. Now, this is where I mention what are called SMEs. And if you're in business, you may hear this term once in a while. An SME is a subject matter expert, okay? These are people who are knowledgeable about a given job. They really know the job. You're talking, as you see there, employees. I don't have that listed, but supervisors, maybe customers, the people on the receiving end. If you work in an organization big enough that has a training department, these are people who are knowledgeable about the job, and you definitely want to turn around and approach them. So keep that in mind. And obviously the employee, I didn't list that there, but those are people that are knowledgeable. And one of the things you can do is to sit down, bring all of these people together, and do what is called an SME interview. SME interviews basically is designed to, you can do them separately, one at a time with these individuals versus a group. Some people say you should because people start talking in a group and then not everything gets out. Some people fear saying things and so on, what we tend to find, and the research backs this up, is that group interviews, SME interviews, are just as good as taking the subject matter experts and interviewing them one at a time. But this is a way to gather up information about the job. You ask the people in the know. What are the duties? What are the competencies? What do you need to know to do the job? Okay, what are the skills? What are the abilities, and so on. One way of doing this is a technique developed by a gentleman called the Ammerman Technique. And I really like this technique. I have for a while. The Ammerman Technique is a method whereby a group of subject matter experts, their job is to identify the objectives, okay, and the standards that the ideal worker will do. Ideally, what is it that the best overall quality employee in this given position, what would they do? Okay, that's very important. So how do you do this? As you see listed there, the first thing you want to do is go find those employees, those supervisors, those individuals from the training department, and possibly customers, and see if you can bring them all together. All right. And basically, you sit down and you ask them just that. What are the objectives uh, to be met by the ideal employee? What duties would they do, and how well would they do them? We want to know ideally, to what extent would an employee do certain things, and what would be considered, very high quality. It doesn't have to be perfection, but very high quality. So we're talking about what standard are the ideal employee going to maintain in doing a job, and what duties, what objectives. So I try to give you an example. If you have someone who is a bank teller, the ideal bank teller will turn around and be friendly, will distribute cash out to people in a timely, efficient manner, will maintain their register, their till, so as to ensure that they're not short on money or over on money, and they will do everything in a prompt manner. That might be some of the objectives and the standards. You want them to be prompt. You want them to be friendly. You want them to smile when every customer walks up, and be sociable. So first of all, you identify the objectives and you identify the standards. Secondly, you turn around then and have them list the behaviors to meet those objectives. What specifically do employees have to do to meet the objectives? They have to be friendly. They have to turn around and maintain their register. They have to turn around and make sure that their money balances. What specific behaviors in there do they have to carry out to reach those objectives? Okay, very, very important. So first, ultimately, what do we want them to do? And then secondly, what are the specific behaviors that are going to make that happen? Now, once you turn around and get those two things, you can move on to the third element, which is basically ranking. All right, now you've got behaviors that'll make up your duties. Ask your SMEs to turn around and rank them. Rank the behaviors from best to worst. Okay. What's most important, I guess, is what I should say. I said best to worst. What's most important, what's least important. More than anything, they have to do this. This other thing, not so much. This third thing, even less so, and so on. So you're identifying importance, and then you're identifying, basically in what rank they're going to be done. Okay. This is the Ammerman technique. You can do this with a handful of employees probably in just an hour or two if you're willing to sit down and put this all down to paper. A lot of times, if you ever see those big easels with paper on them, I like to turn around and stand there and write them down as people give them to me, and I then put them all over a board where we can all see them all and have them rank them. It can take an hour or two, but it can be very, very good at making something work. It truly can. Another method to identify the tasks outside of the interview is to simply do observation. And you can observe current employees. This is really useful if you do it in conjunction with other jobs, other tasks. All right, so maybe you're doing the interviews and you're doing the observations. Maybe you're doing a questionnaire and you're doing the observations. It can be a very, very good method. Uh, the advantage to this, as you see there, is that sometimes by doing observation, you may catch behaviors that are otherwise forgotten. Your SMEs didn't tell you about it, they forgot about it, they didn't think about it, and you observed it. If I do an observation and I see behavior that SMEs do not mention to me, I typically like to go back to them via email or some opportunity and say, hey, I saw this and I saw that. What do you think? Is that the norm? And rank it in terms of importance. So that's an aside that I feel always works well. The other thing I like about observation is some things are very, very hard to explain. Okay, to explain the whole process of basically putting together, something on a manufacturing line. It can be very detailed to explain it all, but if you observe it, you can start to see it better. Another example I've used is trying to explain to someone how to drive a manual transmission car. I'm almost done using this example because nobody has manual transmission anymore. But the process of holding on to the steering wheel, shifting, using the clutch, the brake, the gas, is very hard to explain, but it's easier if you observe it. The biggest disadvantage to observing employees at work is what we call the Hawthorne effect. And without getting into the whole explanation of the Hawthorne effect and how it started, the Hawthorne effect basically means people change their behavior when they know they're being watched. So if you believe in using observation, that's great. But observation can sort of let you down. If you're observing people, people don't always act normally. And so you don't always get the typical behavior, the ideal behavior and stuff like that. But observation can be a very good method. And then really the last one I want to hit upon now is what is called job participation. Sometimes one of the best ways to understand a job is to go out and do the job yourself. Okay, sort of a participatory style of management or understanding. All right, very, very helpful to help you understand every aspect of a given job by doing it yourself. I mean, you truly have an appreciation if you can do that. The problem is some jobs are very complicated, and so just jumping in and doing the task is not easy. Manufacturing jobs, baseline jobs, yes, you can participate and then better understand them. But if you're going to work as a nuclear engineer, chances are you can't just jump in and do those kind of things. Doesn't always work well. And another thing, and this sort of goes with observation as well as job participation, another difficulty is that there can be tasks that are very important to a job, but in the time you're doing the job or observing the job, they just don't occur. If you spend a day, I think your book uses the example of working at a firehouse. You work with firefighters, but in that time you turn around and nothing really happens. You just sit around playing cards and watching television. And if that's all I knew and wrote it up, and the job of a firefighter is to sit around, play cards, and watch television, that's not accurate. Okay, if there's never a call for a fire while you're there, then you miss things. But these are some these are some of the ways to do the very first step, identifying the task, job participation, gathering existing data, interviewing your SMEs, all right, or observing them. Know these four things. This is the way to gather information to help you eventually write that job description. So that's all I've got for now. Keep up the great work.